I don't think it's a particularly hot take to say that people will put up with a lot of nonsense in a video game as long as they actually enjoy it, especially a game they play online with others pretty frequently. I've spent enough time around Destiny players to know this is true. Every time a friend of mine who is, or used to be, a Destiny player rants about the game for the length of a thesis paper, they end their tangent with, "But the combat is good," and logs back in the next day. And I'll be honest, it does make me feel like I'm watching an abusive relationship. Regardless though, even before the player makes the decision to actually play the game, there is one hurdle a game has to jump over in order for that consideration to be made. Style. Style is what catches the eye and plants the seed of interest before any player even picks up the controller. I'm a firm believer that graphical fidelity isn't terribly crucial. You don't need absurdly robust ray tracing or 8K resolution textures or 5 billion triangles per character model to make a good game. Those things aren't needed. What is needed, however, is appealing art direction. This seems obvious at first. You would think that any developer making a game with the hopes of it having some longevity would prioritize a stylish, memorable, and slick aesthetic above everything else, maybe even above gameplay. But for some weird reason, no, they sometimes don't. In fact, sometimes they fumble this aspect of the game to an embarrassing degree. Now, the subject of ugly versus good-looking live service games recently entered, or re-entered, my head when Marvel Rivals released. I'll admit I still haven't played it, but I have seen a lot of gameplay, screenshots, and promotional art, and one thing I think most can agree on is that it has a pretty appealing art style. Bright colors, angular details, distinguishable silhouettes, great outfits, and strong shading all combine to make every character look like they leapt out of a comic book page. The animations are great too, and everyone just looks so lively. It's a game that's pretty pleasing to the eye, which is a nice comfort to take in while your mediocre team is getting absolutely reamed by that one super cracked Hela. The style of this game became especially apparent when I saw that one Twitter post going around comparing the characters and outfits of Marvel Rivals to the Avengers game that released in 2020, developed by Crystal Dynamics. I mean, look at these side-by-sides. Hulk looks so schlubby in the Avengers game, almost like a giant toddler. And the guy on the left here is Hawkeye, but the guy on the right is a cosplayer who's been showing up at every convention for the last 8 years in this one outfit because it was made by his ex-girlfriend, not him. And here, the guy on the left is T'Challa, King of Wakanda. The guy on the right is Chuck, and he works at the 7-Eleven a few blocks away from my aunt's house. Now, I am being a bit harsh, but it's not all bad. Avengers had some good-looking characters and outfits like Black Widow and Spider-Man, and Hulk in his gladiator outfit specifically isn't too bad either. But it just goes to show that a main character's aura doesn't just come from the fact they are who they are. It also comes from how they present themselves, how they pose, how they lean into their own clothing. Even in these completely static screenshots, you can tell the Marvel Rivals characters are simply standing in a way that fits their demeanor, whereas most of the Avengers characters look like they're waiting in line at the bank. Surprising no one, the Avengers game wasn't terribly popular. Not only were its realistic visuals kind of undesirable, it was also hurt by a weak launch plagued with bugs, and it just never really made up for it. And the game finally shut down in September 2023, almost exactly 3 years after it came out. Credit where it's due though, it lasted longer than I thought it would. But next we're going to talk about a game that did not come anywhere close to lasting longer than anyone thought it would. Concord. This game's failure was biblical. I'm sure you all know about it by this point. It was the entire gaming community's punching bag for weeks, even for people who don't play live service games. Rumored to have a $400 million budget, which I'm still not sure I totally believe to be honest, only to peak at less than 700 players and then shut down 2 weeks after launch, Concord was the biggest bomb in gaming history, or so they say. It's gonna go down as a massive black stain on PlayStation's legacy that will never be fully washed away. Granted, Concord was basically doomed from the start because it was announced as part of Sony's intended onslaught of live service games, which no one really asked for outside of co-op experiences like Helldivers 2. But its art direction definitely didn't help it. Basically every criticism I just gave the cast of the Avengers game goes triple for the cast of Concord. Look at these losers and weirdos who are either over-designed, under-designed, or sometimes both, depending on what part of them you're looking at. They make this game look like one of those fake games you see someone playing in the background of a movie. Firewalk could have gone totally crazy with character designs by giving us actual, endearingly odd aliens or badasses, but instead, we get a bunch of random humanoid Dicks and Janes wearing spray paint, and absolutely none of them give the impression that they would be anything more than a background character in a James Cameron movie. I suppose there's an argument that a few of them look somewhat decent, but even when they're all standing next to each other, they feel like they're from totally different games. Concord's characters are so off-putting that they've become sport for artists to try and fix. By and large, these are a bunch of dorks I would gladly shoot at, but would never want to be. And that is why making a live service game that looks unattractive is so bad. Players don't want to be represented by a character they think is ugly or lame. And if every character in the game looks ugly or lame, then that can totally cripple their desire to play. If a player is going to log into a game regularly, they at least want to feel cool, but they can't do that if they think their character doesn't even look cool to start with. You don't know if you're going to enjoy a game until you start playing it, but before you even reach that point, you need to pick a character to represent you. And are you going to pick one who looks like a loser? I play fighting games fairly often, and one question I see a lot from people playing a fighting game for the first time is, how do I pick a character? And the most common answer is, try the characters you think look the coolest first. But when all characters look unappealing, that choice is gone. What's tragic is that this problem doesn't just affect games that suck to play, it also affects games that are actually pretty good. Remember Rumbleverse, the battle royale that focused on hand-to-hand combat, especially wrestling moves? That game was pretty fun, and I was sincerely rooting for it to succeed. But unfortunately, it didn't. It shut down in February 2023, only 6 months after launch. And while there is a few reasons it ultimately got ignored, one of them, and probably the biggest one, was the fact that it just didn't look all that stylish. It had a very cartoony aesthetic that might have worked for some, but it definitely didn't work for everyone. Even people who liked the game a lot sometimes hated looking at their own character because there was no way to make them not doofy looking. And it really is a shame because as both a conceptual and executed idea, the game worked really well. And of course, live service games aren't the only ones who have to worry about this either, and it's not a recent problem. Plenty of games in the past have gotten their legs cut off right out the gate because of their awful appearance. In 2017, another Marvel game was hurt by this. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. You couldn't even look at discussions about the game without seeing screenshots of ugly Chun-Li, ugly Dante, and those cheap Infinity eggs that came with the collector's edition of the game as the cherry on top. People were so put off by the game's looks, they wouldn't even believe you when you said the game was actually pretty fun. And it was. But it didn't matter because a lot of people simply didn't want to be caught playing a game they think is hideous. Infinite tossed out the eye-pleasing cel-shaded art style that Marvel vs. Capcom 3 had and replaced it with a more realistic appearance that sapped all the sauce out of it. And it made the game look cheap, even if it was mechanically fun. First impressions of the game were catastrophic, and it never really redeemed itself. Not even rollback netcode, which fighting game fans had wanted for years, saved it from an early death. It took 7 years and a team of modders commissioned by streamer Maximilian Dude to finally make Infinite's visuals look appealing in a recent overhaul mod called Infinite and Beyond, and the difference is staggering. I can't help but wonder why the game didn't just look like this on day one. A year before Infinite, another fighting game released that got slammed for being ugly, The King of Fighters 14. This is where I was one of the people who enjoyed the game and was trying to get others to play, and it was like fucking pulling teeth. Even people who were already familiar with and enjoyed KOF gameplay were resistant to playing it because it was so ugly. It's not a coincidence that a lot of the more popular live service games tend to also have pleasing aesthetics. Now, the MiHoYo games may suffer from a lack of body type variety. The most muscular dude in Genshin Impact still looks like Timothée Chalamet in Call Me By Your Name, but their characters are still cute and distinctive, and Zenless Zone Zero specifically has the art direction, setting, animations, and combat to draw the attention of some people who never even glanced at Genshin or Star Rail to begin with. Final Fantasy XIV is vibrant and loaded with cool, distinguishable characters, beautiful zones, especially recently, awesome gear, and incredible boss fights. It has the undeniable aura of a great Final Fantasy game. Path of Exile has a moody and atmospheric, dark fantasy world with tons of enemies and areas that are as interesting as they are grotesque or grim. And then we have the king, Overwatch, who seemingly solved this entire problem back in 2016. Overwatch's art direction was so appealing that it led to a fan-made 3D porn revolution. That is not a joke either, or an exaggeration. There is a 2,500-word article on Wikipedia detailing specifically Overwatch's relationship with and effects on porn. Widowmaker, Tracer, Mercy, Diva, and Mei altered the brains of at least 2 generations because of how ridiculously hot they are. There are fan modelers and animators who pay their bills because they churn out Overwatch porn. It's kinda nuts that this continues to be an issue. In gaming overall, yes, but especially in the live service space. If there's one major symptom most of us can point to, it's definitely the desire, sometimes obsession, with realism and being grounded. Now sure, a realistic and gritty art style can work in places, but in games that are supposed to feel fantastical, realism feels like the last style you should be going for. Because if you don't totally nail it, you're just going to hurt your game's chances of surviving, especially in a category of games so competitive and cutthroat. It's laughable when a game has an unattractive art style on top of mediocre gameplay, sure, but it's painful when it's on top of good gameplay and you just have to watch the game die. Wasted potential hurts more than no potential at all. So please, live service game developers, regardless of what kind of game you're making, think long and hard about how you stylize your game, because the wrong choice can, and probably will, kill its chances of survival before it even comes out. This concludes my thoughts on ugly live service games. Now before you go, please check out my merch store if you haven't already. As of right now, I have 2 shirt designs, a sliced skull and a tribute to Hironobu Sakaguchi, creator of the Final Fantasy series. I also have a beanie with my logo embroidered on it, great for the cold weather. Both shirt designs are available in lightweight fabric and heavyweight cotton. I've already received samples of everything for quality checking, and I can confirm they look great in person. If you're interested, visit mildconviction.com or check the store tab of my YouTube channel page. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.